Local Matters family. Today we are joined by someone who is very interested in local matters, but she's all the way in California. And her name is Beth Green. How are you doing today, Beth?
I'm fine, but I just want to correct you if you don't mind. I'm in Oregon.
Oh, okay. I'm going to change that out then. And
Oh,
I
okay.
am
Start
going to have
again.
my editor just edit that out. All right. We'll start over.
Okay.
Hi, Local Matters family. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we have a guest by the name of Beth Green. She is not local to the Augusta area, but she's very interested in local matters. She is joining us all the way from the great state of Oregon. How are you doing
Yeah.
today,
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Beth? Thank you so much for being able and willing to join us today. I've read your bio and some materials on you, and it appears that you have been an activist for all of your life. Is that right?
I would say so, yes. I was
Okay.
giving lectures on human consciousness when I was 5, so I guess you could say that.
So tell me, how is it that a 5-year-old is interested in such things?
Well, I think that people spontaneously and automatically do feel each other's pain. And for some reason, I couldn't run away from it. And I'm an empath anyway. I discovered that I was an empath. And so I have a tendency to really feel people's pain. I mean, in my body, and that's how I'm able to do counseling. I just feel what people feel. I see what they see. I have their memories. I have their dreams and all of that. But even as a child, and I didn't know I was an empath then. I had no spirituality. Um, I could feel the pain of people, and I was appalled by it and disturbed by it deeply and wanted to do something about it. So that's the real story that I still want to do something about pain, people's pain, the animals' pain, the pain of the forest in these days of climate change. It's, that's the way it is. That's the motivation.
Now, that's interesting that you discovered you were an empath. Approximately how far along in your journey? How old were you when you figured out that you were an empath?
35.
35. Okay. I was probably 55 when I
Oh,
figured out I was an empath. I had
oh my
never
God.
heard that term before. I was on Facebook and one of my cousins had posted something about being an empath. And I was like, well, what is that? And I looked up the definition and I said, yeah, that would be me.
Oh my
I have a few characteristics. I like to tell people, my joke is that I have a sign on my forehead that says, tell me all your business, because people will just walk up to me and tell me all of their business. And I found out that that was one of the characteristics of an empath. There is something that appears about us that people can trust us. So complete
Yes.
strangers, which is, I mean, no joke, total strangers. I will find out all about their lost love, the high school sweetheart, why they got married, why they got divorced. And I'm like, why are they telling me all this stuff? And it's apparently there's something that says that they can trust me with that information. So
That's very cool. Well, I didn't immediately think of it as being an empath. I just had an intuitive awakening in 1980 where I started hearing voices. And having been an atheist up to that point, that was pretty shocking. And these voices were sort of telling me what to do. And I became a spiritual teacher overnight and an intuitively guided counselor the first day that I had this awakening, and I've been doing it ever since. And it was only later that I realized that how I'm doing it is that I'm actually feeling their feelings. And that's how come I know they're lying to me when they tell me this or that. And, that's the hard thing about, when you know and you can feel it and they're just lying to themselves and lying to you. And you're just like, oh, okay. But if they're my client, then I get a chance to confront that. And because it's our secrets that kill us.
Now, and you mentioned client. Are you a counselor?
Yes, that's what I do for a living.
What you
I'm
do?
still working. I became a counselor that day when I had the psychic awakening. And I learned how to do it completely intuitively. I have no training. I have no training in spirituality. I have no training in counseling. I have no, I did study history when I was young. And but I've been guided over the years about how to work with people, and it has changed, according to what people need. So it keeps me alert, alive, and engaged because there isn't a person on the planet that I don't have empathy for if they're in my office. If they're not in my office and they're not coming for help, I have a little trouble. And they're hurting other people. It's kind of hard to have empathy for them. But I know that if Adolf Hitler was sitting, who came to me as a client, I would feel his pain, right?
Okay. All right. That is a unique skill, a unique attribute to be able to do that. Tell me a little bit about being an atheist, because I'm the complete opposite. I was raised in a very spiritual household. We went to Sunday school
Mm,
and church every Sunday. That's all I know.
mm.
So, how is it that someone is an atheist?
That's a very interesting question. My family is what they call conservative Judaism. They weren't reformed, which was like, oh, they didn't eat, they didn't live like the non-Jews. On the other hand, they weren't Orthodox, and they really weren't very spiritual or religious. On the high holidays, we went to the shul, the synagogue. But you would not believe, because you probably are not aware of this, that in those days, that it was so paternalistic, the Jewish religion was so paternalistic that they would say in the prayers on Saturday, "Thank God you didn't make me a woman." Yeah, you can close your mouth now. So anyway, because the men were up there, they were the rabbis, they were the cantors. In the conservative Jewish religion, of course, in the Orthodox as well, at least in those days, and remember, I'm 80 years old, so this was a long time ago, um, you couldn't have a service unless there were 10 men there. Having a woman there would not count. So I was turned off, very turned off by the Jewish religion, by the ritualistic, the rules and regulations. And I did not feel the spirituality except when I heard the cantors sing. And that just always moved me. That crying, I don't know if you've ever heard cantors singing, but it's very, it kind of sounds a lot like Arabic music. It has that kind of tonality.
I have. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's from the soul. Whereas the rest of the religion's very mental. This is the soul speaking to God and crying out to God and telling God how great God is. But I'm looking around and I'm saying, really? Are you serious? I don't see that great God is great. Now I'm going to probably offend you, but I have to tell you the truth. That's what I saw. I saw suffering. I was born at the end of the Holocaust. Our family was wiped out. You talk about cousins, and it's like, we don't have family. Most of our family's dead. Some people came over after the war when we're in displaced persons camps and ended up in Israel or in California. And no, I am not a Zionist, but I understand the pain that caused that. And so I saw a very painful world, and I saw a painful world right where I lived. My father would take me to work. He was a very unsuccessful hardware salesman, came from a working class, poor family, really quite poor. And I saw the way he was treated when he went to work, and he was trying to sell to these buyers. And the buyers had an ounce more power than he did because he's trying to get the sale. And I saw it right before my eyes, the power differential and how power is used against people. And I was outraged,
Wow.
whether it was just on a class basis or just on a job basis or a man-woman basis or on a racial basis, all of that trying to make yourself bigger by putting other people down. I saw that as a child, and that's what turned me into an activist, rather into a religious person. And what I said to God at the time, because now, of course, then I became a spiritual teacher, right? But at that time, it was like I said, if there is a God, I would have to hate you for what I see, the pain that I see, the needless pain that I see. So that's how it was. It isn't that I didn't want to have faith in something or that I didn't have a natural spirituality, which I guess I must have, but I saw the world as being screwed up and I was tired of people being blamed for it.
That is an awesome and personal explanation for that. I think I could also see some of those differences and weep inside when I was it's not fair. See things go, that's just not fair. I
Yeah.
remember when I was in the eighth grade, I think it was, we had a wonderful eighth grade history teacher. And she was the person that taught us how to grow up. You get out of
Oh, yeah.
elementary school and then, you got to face the real world. And she was the person that taught us how to face the real world. And one day she was asking me, what do you want from life? And the word came out of my mouth as an eighth grader was justice. And of
Yes,
course, folks made me think that there was something wrong, that was what I was asking for. But I mean, it embodies the empath tendency that apparently I had all the time. So
exactly,
that
exactly. Exactly. God once said to me that the atheist is just the other side of the spiritual person. It's seeing the pain, feeling the pain, and trying to find a solution. Now, this you might really hate, but I wrote my first book was called The Healing of God, and that it was that God wasn't healing us, that we were healing God, because the way I saw it is that God is the totality of all being, because God created everything. So
Mhm.
everything is a creation of God, and you can't separate it out. So God and the devil, or sex and spirituality, or all of these things are deeply connected. And so I said, I was tired of, well, see, that's another long story about how I got into spirituality, which had to do with being with an alcoholic and going to Al-Anon to try to get him to stop drinking. And I went into an Al-Anon meeting and I saw, this is after years of activism, and they had some kind of serenity that I didn't have. And I said, I need this.
Mhm.
I need this. I need something else in my life to deal with this pain. But I was always apologizing about, oh, I was terrible. I had all these character defects and all of that. And finally, one day I was in the bathtub and I just jumped out of the bathtub and I said, physician, heal thyself. You created us the way we are. You got to take responsibility for the way that we are, because we are a reflection of you. We are made in your image. And so get over this and let's all come together and try to end all the separation and all the hurt and the exploitation and all of that and come together. And that's what I call the healing of God, is when all aspects of consciousness come together. But there was a long time before that. I just want to tell you very quickly, when I was 9 years old, I became a socialist. And that's, and I refused to salute the flag because they added the words under God. And I said, no, that is against the separation of church and state. So that's out. And I also saw Senator McCarthy on television looking for communists to arrest. And, which was like, I mean, it's like, are we there again? And, and I read a book about the Spanish Civil War, and I saw what the fascists were doing and what the socialists stood for. And not the Soviet communism, but they were for, having equality and having people have a decent life. And I said, that's it. I am a socialist. And they tried to expel me from elementary school for, yeah, for refusing to salute the flag on constitutional grounds.
What? Where did you grow up again? Where were you in elementary school?
I was in New York. I
In New
was
York.
in
Okay. Okay.
Queens. Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in Queens. Though I went to high school
Please.
in Manhattan because I was in performing arts and stuff.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you grow up in a Jewish family that's not terribly Jewish, if I may
No,
use
and
that
not
term,
political either. They're
and not
not socialist
political.
either. Oh no.
And you go through all of these realizations and revelations about yourself. You're partnered with somebody who is an alcoholic. You go accompany them to Alcoholics Anonymous, and you have a spiritual awakening. What does that mean in terms of your practice of religion? Are you attached to an organized religion or not?
Well, I love that you asked me that question. By the way, I didn't go to an AA meeting with him. I went to an Al-Anon meeting, which is for the families of alcoholics, because they told me go to Al-Anon. And that's what changed me. By the way, I
For
discovered
that
my own
distinction.
alcoholism.
Yeah.
I quit
Mhm.
drinking in 1980. Haven't had a drink since, thank God. But it's a very, very interesting question. You're the only one who's ever asked me that. Well, so I had a loyalty to Judaism because of the Holocaust in particular. Don't tell me that I can't be Jewish. And I remember in the day seeing signs that said, no Jews or dogs. Yeah. And so, I mean, literally. So at most of my life, so earlier, I wasn't thinking about being Jewish, but I got a scholarship to an Ivy League college after having been in bed for a year and a half. And that's a
Which Ivy League school?
Smith. It
Okay.
was a girls' college in Massachusetts.
One of my neighbors from Augusta, Georgia, went to school at Smith. Okay.
Well, I hope it was after I went because they were horrible. They were horrible. They were anti-Semitic. They were terrible. And that was when I became more like defiant that I am Jewish because they were anti-Semitic. And I was introduced to guys, and our whole thing was to be the perfect lady. The person at my school was teaching me how to slice lemon and that kind of thing. And I mean, I was working class, we picked up the chicken in our hands, you know what I mean? I didn't know how to cut chicken with a knife. So anyway, so
What was this? As you made, what year was this?
I went to Smith College in 1961. That's the school that I got expelled from.
Okay. Okay.
And there's a fascinating story about that too, that had to do with a letter that I wrote to the New York Times about banning the bomb when I was 16 years old, and wasn't supposed to mail because I wasn't allowed to get up and walk out of the house and go to the mailbox. For a year and a half, I was in bed or a chair. So, but what happened was I felt very confused because when I had this spiritual awakening, I was talking to these entities in the sky. I talked to Jesus. I wrote the autobiography of Mary Magdalene. Well, of course, he was Jewish. So, but it was confusing to me. And I went to a synagogue in LA because at that time I was living in Los Angeles. And I walked to the synagogue, and it was an amazing place. It was like one of these gorgeous cathedrals that you see, that Christians have. Well, this was an amazing, beautiful Jewish temple. It wasn't like the corner store, like the ones that we had in our neighborhood because we were poor. And I had an experience where I saw this light. I felt like I really saw God. It was just light. And I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I felt conflicted. And the inner voice, which I call God, but you can call anything, call it the universe, call it Buddha. It doesn't matter. To me, they're all the same. God said, you need not forsake the faith of your forefathers, but you must not embrace it. You want to wrap your head around that? So I did not have to embrace Judaism, but I needed to be open to the oneness of all spirituality and to be in a, connected to the divine and not get stuck in any belief system. Because I think all belief systems, this you may really disagree with me on, are made up by humans. They're written by humans. Their dogma is written by humans. It all gets codified by humans. And God told me that beliefs are just beliefs, that human beings have no way of comprehending the incomprehensible, and that we need to be willing to walk the path of not knowing and not get stuck in beliefs and arguing beliefs. So that I learned many years later, when I channeled this thing called the path of not knowing. But in those early days, when God told me that, I realized there was no issue, that I was making it up in my mind, that I would never allow for anti-Semitism, but I wouldn't allow for anti-Polish either, or anti-Black, or anti-anything. So that's where I stood in all of that. And I think we need to be looking at what unites us instead of focusing on what is theoretically different about us.
That was more than a mouthful. And I certainly appreciate that. Um, the old me in terms of you said a couple of times, I hope I haven't offended you.
Right.
The old me and the way I was raised in terms of interpretation of scripture might have been, but there's enough now that I read and listen to that I definitely understand that we don't have all the answers. So I believe in the God that I believe in. I believe that God stands for love. And I just want to be a loving human being, and that's the best form of worship that I can tell for any of us
Yeah,
is just to be loving human beings.
yeah.
So you stay at Smith for how long?
Well, if they had had their way, they would have expelled me on the second day. But they had no way to do that. I mean, here I was, I had a scholarship, but I'm at this very rigid Ivy League, very classist place. And I wrote this letter to the New York Times to ban the bomb. And this is related to the question you asked me. So as I said, I was born with the hereditary condition. So I've been sick all my life, but I became severely ill at 15. And I've been pretty much that way ever since. So that's a long time to be sick and in pain. But I have to keep busy. So I can't sit there and think about myself or I'm in trouble. So anyway, I wrote this letter and I never thought it would get published. I mean, here I was, a nobody. And I went off to Smith. And then my mother calls me and she said, "Is this you?" And here it is in the New York Times, in the letters to the editor, my letter with my name, which was Beth Ingber at the time, of Belrose, New York, right? And she said, "Somebody read this." And she said, "Is this your daughter?" And she said, "Is this you?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, anyway, they were shocked, but they were proud because if I got into the New York Times, that made them happy. You see, my parents were poor and they didn't have high school educations, but they had that Jewish ethic, that their children were going to go on and be educated. And I learned to play the piano and all of that. So anyway, okay, so not too long after that, somebody at the school heard about my letter. This letter went around the world. I should be so lucky now. But it just happened then. It hit a chord for some reason, went around the world. It ended up on the front cover of a Pete Seeger album. I don't know if you know who Pete Seeger is, but he was a tremendous activist in the day, right, with Joan Baez and all of these really iconic people. And So I got letters from around the world for people who read my letter and were moved by it. So I found out that somebody at the school had seen it and that had told the administration about it. And the administration immediately wanted to get rid of me. In fact, it was so bad that you understand what my health was. I barely have gotten out of bed for a year and a half. I have no rehabilitation. Nobody's helping me. And I had a hereditary condition to start with that made me weak. And they said I had to carry trays in the cafeteria because if I didn't, I have to leave the school. So this will give you an idea of the attitude that they had towards me. So they were trying to get rid of me from the beginning. And then what made it worse was that I was contacted by some students from some Ivy League colleges in the East Coast. And they said, we read your letter, we're from Yale, we're from whatever it is, and we are going to have a hunger march at the White House for Thanksgiving. And do you want to come? And in those days, you could not cut a class before Thanksgiving without getting in trouble at Smith College, ridiculous as it might seem today. And so I had to go and tell the dean that I was going to have to cut one class, but I had this thing that I had to do. And she said to me, you will be punished. I will teach you a lesson you will never forget. You're talking to a 16-year-old, right? And I came back, and I was scared. Janice, I was scared. I didn't have the backing of my parents. They didn't know that I was going, right? Um, there was no, I had, but I knew, and if I had had a concept of God, I would have said, God called me and said, you've got to stand up to this, Beth. You've got to do it. And I didn't jump out of the car. I went to DC and found out when I got there that there was only 14 of us marching around the White House. So you're gonna understand. So my face ends up on the front page of the New York Times, walking down, and somebody calls my parents and they say, "Is that your daughter?" They call me and say, "Did you go to us?" Anyway, they put me on probation. They put me on probation. And that meant that I couldn't miss any classes. They knew that was going to be impossible. And they put me on an even worse probation. And they expelled me without a hearing because I missed a class on a calendar day. See?
And that also demonstrates how much school has changed over the last 60 plus years.
Yes.
Now students miss class all the time. And if someone had told you, you can't go to school here if you can't carry your lunch tray, that would have been an ADA claim.
That's right. Exactly. Not to speak of the fact that had it happened, because maybe by the time I was expelled, it was 1961. If it happened like 4 or 5 years later, the school would have been in an uproar. The students would have rebelled.
Yes.
They would have gone after the administration, but there was no support. And when I got home, my parents hid me in the house because they didn't want the neighbors to see me. What would the neighbors think was my mother's favorite expression? And as you could see, I didn't give a hoot about what the neighbors thought, right?
Right. Goodness. So it took a lot of courage to be an activist 60 plus years ago. And let's talk about the term activism.
Yeah.
When I saw that on your bio, I thought about former President Obama. Part of his resume was that he was a community activist. And I remember his opponents making fun of that. Just sort of, what is a community activist? Is that a job? What does an activist do? Et cetera, et cetera. So what is an activist to you?
What is an act? You're great. You ask me all these questions nobody else does. An activist is somebody who sees injustice and takes action. How's that? And there was lots of it, lots of injustice. I didn't get to be part of the Southern civil rights movement. I was too young, but I saw it. I was outraged, and I was part of, well, as the Ban the Bomb movement, and then the anti-Vietnam War movement, which I learned about in 1963. Meanwhile, I'm reading Karl Marx, and I'm understanding how capitalism works. And I became a socialist because I saw capitalism as intrinsically exploitative, that the way it operates, it doesn't give you the full value of what you produce because they're looking to make profit and everything. And then it becomes more and more and more outrageous. And I read Marx, and he's right. He really described how the system worked. And now it's like, it's all about profit, all about profit. People can barely survive to go to work. And now if they could replace us with robots, they would, and then let us all starve. And there is absolutely no care for human beings, no care for the planet, no care for the earth. And there are so many things, but at the bottom of it actually is what I call the ego, which is a spiritual way of looking at what really ails us, and that capitalism is just ego run amok. It's just run wild of only caring for me. Short-term thinking, it's all about me. I'm not part of the oneness, which I know it's obvious from what you've said already. You don't feel that way. We are, God used to talk to me very directly, and there was this statement, I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. And, I know that's true. And you as an empath know it. It's because we're empathetic, we see it and feel it in real time that we are each other. And if there is an undocumented person sitting next to me in a bus with a communicable disease and they can't go to a doctor, I'm going to get it. And, if you've got Ebola in Africa, the whole world is one. And there was another, I wrote a book called God's Little Aphorisms. And one of them was, you cannot clean the air over one house in Los Angeles. That we have a collective destiny and we have to deal with it collectively. So yes, I see this economic system, I see the social system, I see the oppression of women who were never paid for the value of our labor. For 4 years, I was the West Coast coordinator of the Wages for House Work campaign about why women are so weak in our world and in our society, and trying to fight against that. So seeing it all, a lack of realization that if a man wants to dominate his wife and she doesn't have money of her own, she is a drag on him. He can't go strike. So you never gain power at the expense of another human being. It's wrong thinking. It's all ego-based. It's all wrong thinking. And so that's what I'm trying to, and that's why I call myself a spiritual activist, because I see the spiritual sickness that is underneath the way we treat each other. When Kamala Harris was defeated and they kept saying, well, why was she? It was because of this. Because to me, it was obvious because she was a Black woman. I mean, what more do you need? All you had to do is see the way they were campaigning against her, trying to get men, rev up men, because their poor little egos are damaged because women are standing up and demanding equality, and that white people are freaked out because people of color might outnumber them. And it's so based on separation consciousness, which is what the ego is all about.
Thank you for that. That is, thank you. Thank you for saying a whole lot of things that a lot of us have been thinking about
Oh, really?
for a long time, especially over the past year or so. I want to talk to you a little bit about spiritual activism. You've defined it. Thank you so much for doing that. But I have to say that in today's world, the notion of Christian nationalism is what people think about often when they hear about spirituality and politics. And I know that one of the other topics that you have written on and spoken on often is about the toxicity of our current politics in our country. So
Mhm.
tell me how you reconcile your spiritual position, your spiritual beliefs with the notion of activism, with the current political environment, with, what folks who are very much on the other side of the spectrum from you, the Christian nationalists think. How do you pull all that together and reconcile?
Well, I think, again, you keep asking me these great questions. I'd love you. I hope you get the feeling unusual.
And
Yeah,
y'all, we didn't know each other before we did this interview.
no.
We just met today. Go
Well,
ahead.
I told you the minute I saw your face, I said, this is a good one. This is going to be a good one because I've had some insane interviews, like with guys who said, you mean women are not irrational when they menstruate? So anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Anyway, Christian nationalists are not spiritual. They're dogmatists. They are looking for power. Spirituality is not about power. It's about oneness. It's about recognizing that we are one and that there sees I have a book called Living with Reality, and it's got 9 platforms. There are 9 steps towards elevating your consciousness, evolving your consciousness. And it's the first step is becoming oneness, becoming differentiated, becoming co-creative, becoming mutually supportive, becoming self-aware, becoming accountable, becoming uh, not knowing, becoming. These are, and this book came to me over 9 years. All of my books were not written by me, but this one took 9 years to write because I kept doing workshops and working with people because it's full of tools and techniques and everything. And it's very obvious. It is very obvious that the ego begins when we're born, if not before, when all of a sudden we're thrown out in the world and we have to fend for ourselves and we have to cry. And before that, it's all taken care of. We're in the womb, like, oh yeah, maybe I'm getting a little too big for this, but I think might want to move. But you're taken care of. When you are born, the first thing you are aware of is nobody is giving you food, air, or anything. You have to cry, you have to demand, you have to start asking for stuff, right? And so we become super aware. We've been in the oneness, and now we're out there, and then we're competing with our siblings. Who's going to get mama's attention? Mama is falling off her feet. She is exhausted, and we have to make mama take care of us no matter what, no matter how she feels. And this is the way we start developing strategies for survival. Like, oh yeah, some mamas are very susceptible to guilt. So then we become the most, and or some mamas are scared and we become very, or daddy might be the power in the house and we know how to, make daddy like us. If we're a girl, we go goo goo gaga. For the guy, we're the chip off the old block. I mean, there's 1,000,001 strategies that the ego develops from birth, and it's associated with survival, and it's hard to overcome. No matter how much you tell people, this is stupid. We all inherit the earth. We're pissing on the earth. It's going to kill all of us. And you say, and they're, but they can't help themselves. Drill, baby, drill, right? Because they're thinking about their profit and not about their even ultimately our survival depends on oneness. So now coming back to Christian nationalism, they have a set of beliefs, dogmas, and it's all about how they are better. How could that be spiritual? We all have the same God. We're all made in God's image. So is it like everybody's made in God's image except? And so it's, the absurdity of it is that it has to do with fear. they're not basing themselves on spirituality or love. Now, there are Christians who are amazing, great people, right? Even if I disagree with some of the things that they believe in, we can always get along because we have something deep in common, which is that we all feel the oneness. And so I've had friends like that, but people who are Christian nationalists, they don't like anybody but themselves. It's all a big power grab. Now, when I started talking about, so I've honed down spiritual activism to oneness, accountability, and mutual support. And that our world, we need to start recognizing that we are one and everybody needs a fair shake. Secondly, we need to be accountable for the damage that we do. We can't live a perfect life and not do damage, but we can at least take accountability for it. And mutual support means I am not threatened by your power. Your power gives me power. You know, if you have two legs and one is weak, you're going to fall over. If you've got a table with four legs, you're better off. You know, we need one another. I need your experience. I need your brain. I need your spirit. I need your physicality. I can't do anything by myself. All I can do is talk. You know, I have a husband who does everything in the house. He's my caretaker on a physical plane, but he can't make a living. So, you know, so what if he's the caretaker and I'm doing who cares? Together we make a whole. We're all facets of that same diamond, so, or ruby or sapphire. So Christian nationalists irk the hell out of me because they have no claim on spirituality. Christian nationalists, I think the Spanish Inquisition, right? or or the Christians who came to the quote new world, which wasn't new, and you know enslaved black people and brought them over for labor, and really enslaved the native people and killed them off. I mean, wow, that was really enlightened.
You so much for that take on that. We could talk absolutely all day. I try to keep my podcast episodes under an hour because I know folks have a limited attention
Of
span.
course.
However, before we close out, there is at least one thing, there are two things that I've got to ask you. I want to ask you about your book, but we'll save that to the very end. What I really want to focus on now is your age. You've mentioned a couple times that you are 80 years old and you're still working on a regular basis. You still consult, you still counsel, and you're still an activist. Um, do you see yourself doing this forever?
I hope so. First of all, I don't have the money to retire. I don't. I don't know. Some people do. But see, I have not spent my life with the purpose of saving money. You know, I was an activist for years. You don't get paid much for being an activist. I mean, I worked for the movement. I did all kinds of stuff like that. And I was always a rabble rouser. You know, I wasn't trying to make money. That wasn't my goal. And then when had my spiritual awakening, I was lucky that I found a way to make a living. And being chronically ill, it was really hard. I had a chance to work in a couple of factories. I had a chance to work because of my political, I wanted to see what that experience was like. But physically, I couldn't do anything. If I didn't have this gift, this spiritual gift, this intuitive gift, and the gift of gab, I would be homeless. You know, I understand that. So I have to work, but I also want to. I'm not done. The pain is still there. I can't do as much. I've never been able to march in my own marches because I wasn't physically capable of it. You know, I always had major health problems, but and I'm sicker than I used to be, and I'm weaker than so I have to pace myself. But no, no. And if I wanted to retire in any way, the current administration has given me no rest, because every day there is a new injustice and a new group of people who are being terrified, terrorized, and oppressed. And so there is maybe someday, if the world changes and we all have a spiritual awakening and we come together for what I call it, the potluck revolution. You know, a potluck, you bring what you have and you take what you need. That's what I call what society is supposed to be about, what the economy is supposed to be about. We bring what we give what we have and we take what we need. And I believe that the purpose of any economy or any society is to meet the needs of people and the earth. And if someday everybody wakes up and realizes that I'll retire as long as I have, somebody gives me some money. But, I it's not around the corner yet.
Okay. I just wonder about that because I mean, I may very well be working with them when I'm 82 as well. My joke is that Dr. Ruth was still sitting on a couch
Right,
talking about sex when she was 94. So
right.
I figured, hey, I can probably talk about local government that long as well. Uh, and I don't believe that retirement is a scriptural construct. I think that God intends for us to do things for as long as we live. So
Help other people is the way to have the best mental health.
right. That is completely correct. Let's talk about you a little bit as an author. You've written 6 books.
Yeah.
Tell us about your favorite of all the books you've written. Which two, if you could recommend that people go find 2 of them, which 2 would that be?
Well, well, I'm going to sneak something in very quickly. The Healing of God, Sacred Union, the Healing of God, where I say God is not perfect, God is evolving. And that when we compare ourselves to perfection, we always feel bad. And we need to stop feeling guilty, stop feeling ashamed, but have awareness. We need self-awareness, not self-judgment. And so we need to keep evolving. So that was one of my first books. And I lost half my clients when I wrote that book, truthfully, truthfully. And then I have like a cute book, God's Little Aphorisms, and each one is about something that God taught me in a day. Like if I had meant you to know everything, Beth, I wouldn't have had to make other people. And I always think I should know everything. And so they're all favorites and different, but I guess the biggest one is Living with Reality, which is 688 pages. And all of my books are free on the healingartsnetwork.org. And healingartsnetwork.org, you should have that URL. I've got my music there. I've channeled music to heal my husband's dementia. It's all free. I have piano music. I have different kinds of music. And I'm also I do 2 live streams a week on Facebook and YouTube also. And so that book is there free. And it's a roadmap to how we are going to evolve and get past all of this mess. And so you can find my books are on Amazon, but you can get them, you can download them free on healingartsnetwork.org. And then there's the handbook for the inner revolution, which is a short book. It's under 100 pages. And I talk about oneness, accountability, and mutual support in very easy terms. And so some people might want to start with that. So I know that I cheated. You asked for 2 and I told you about 4. And I have 2 others that I will restrain myself. Oh, I don't hear you, Janice. You're on mute.
Sorry. Tell us about your Facebook pages if we want to hear you live.
Yeah. Well, it's facebook.com/Granny Rocks On.
Granny Rocks On. I love it.
And on YouTube, I'm at Beth Green TV. Just Beth Green TV, all one word. And what I do on Wednesday nights, I have a commentary show. It's like a podcast, and it's called Lighting the Way with Beth Green and Friends. And I take on whatever's happening because I mean, I've been doing this for years, whatever is going on, but I talk about it from the inside out. I don't only talk about these people are horrible, those people are horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible. You know, I try to understand what's really going on in our society and what's going on in us. And so, you know, so, and the co-creation of the mess that we've co-created, but keeping people motivated to keep standing up and fighting for the good fight. So that is Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's California, Oregon time. And what I usually do is I'll speak for 20 minutes, and then my guests, my panel of my friends come on and they make commentary. And the other, and that's live stream on my public Facebook page and on YouTube. And then most people watch it later. And then on Thursday nights, my husband and I do something called Magical Improvs with the Kindred Spirits Band. And when I was 73, I started to play the piano again. After not being able to play from the age of 15 because I was too crippled. And God said, buy an acoustic piano and only improvise. And I said, I can't improvise. I'm a classical pianist that can't play. And I would get crippled every time I tried to play the piano. And I sat down and I understood what God was saying. Play what you can. Play what your hands allowed. And I suddenly started improvising, which I never thought I could do. And that's all I do is I improvise music, whatever comes through me. It's like my books to come through me, my counseling comes through me, my workshops, my retreat, everything just comes through me. And with my husband has now gotten into improvising with me. He sings, he has a beautiful voice. And that's 7 p.m. Thursday nights on Facebook and YouTube.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. Anytime you are a guest here, you become a member of the family. So you are definitely a member of the Local Matters family right now.
Oh, I need that. I have no family except my husband. So
Okay.
I
Yeah,
could
well,
use
you got
I
us.
could use family.
All right.
Thank
Thank you so much for being a guest. We definitely appreciate you and all of the thought-provoking things that you have shared with us today. So we look forward to following you on YouTube and Facebook or subscribing on YouTube, following on Facebook.
Yeah. And sign the new Declaration of Independence, which you will find linked in any of my YouTube or Facebook descriptions, where I say why we need to abolish the current government and what we need to build instead.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Janice. You've been great. Bye.